Hi, and thanks for joining us for this live conversation. See, we already know it's live, yeah. With the incredibly talented Greig Fraser. You know him from movies such as Dune, Lion, and The Batman. We're going to focus on The Batman today because we have so many questions, and maybe we'll convince him to come back another time to talk about maybe Dune or something. But sorry, Greig, I didn't tell you about that. So
It's all right.
we are going to take some questions too as we go along, but let's get started first. Greig, the first thing we want to ask you is actually what made you choose to do the Batman? What intrigued you? What attracted you to the project?
Well, it's funny. There's a couple of things. First and foremost, the director Matt Reeves and I have been friends now for a long time. We did a film together. I think it was my first film in the United States, and in fact, actually, I recall having this conversation with you guys about that film because in the film, Let Me In, involved dark forests, and I said to Roger, I remember it was the first time I kind of got the realization that Roger was actually human and not a kind of a
very human.
Yeah. But I said to Roger, like, I've got this really, really stressful scene. There's no light. We're in the forest. It's dark. It's snow. I mean, what do I do? And you just went, oh no. I think you use the words, I always get the heebies when you read a script page.
Heebies, yeah. Well, okay.
Night. I think that was the word you used. I was like, good. Yes.
You're not
anyway,
alone.
So I met, no. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. My anxiety is across the board. But I met Matt on that film and we got along really well. And, I didn't get a chance to work with him for another 10 years because the schedules didn't line up. So I think he was finishing the Apes film and I had lunch with him and he said, listen, I've just done a meeting with Warner Brothers and they're talking about the Batman. And I went, cool. I said, cool. If you can do the Batman the way that you want to do the Batman, I will be there every step of the way. And, Matt's quite a force. He's quite opinionated, which is a great thing. He has very strong ideas, which is a fantastic thing. He's driven to achieve those goals. And so for me as a DP, as you know, like if you've got the support of a strong director and a strong story backing you up, then you want to put your time and effort into it. Making films is not easy, and we want to make sure that we spend our time wisely. So
especially a film like that, I imagine, and so long. The schedule must have been enormously long. Well, I know it was because I knew a lot of people working on it.
It became long, especially because of COVID. I think it spanned over. We started 2019 and finished in 2021, I think. So it spanned over 3 years with the whole break of COVID. But yeah, but also it's a character as well. Like from a challenge perspective, it was a huge challenge because it had to be dark, it had to be moody. Gotham is an interesting character in itself. The city of Gotham is a character all by itself. The character of Bruce Wayne is quite tortured. The character of Batman, it was just a character piece. It was a fantastic character piece.
Yeah,
so that's it was a chance to take.
Yeah, that's what made it above, the usual superhero movie to me. I mean, I felt it was really strong because of that, because it was interesting characters. Yeah.
So it was basically the director, first of all, because there was no script at that point when he was talking to you. It was the director, and you're going, yeah, if he's going to do it, he's going to do it right?
Yep. And we also had we had such a long lead time in the sense that we could start talking about ideas. We could start talking about visual ideas. Like I was talking to him less about character arcs, but within his arc that we were talking about visual ideas. I recall sending him references of. I found a shot of Paris flooded, and it was a CG shot. It was a digital shot that somebody had done about a flooded Paris street, like after a storm or after a deluge. And it was such a peaceful looking image. And it was I don't know, I think it's sort of spawned an idea in Matt to whether or not the flood, it was the aftermath of the flood or whatever it was. You probably have to speak to him specifically. But there was a number of visual ideas that we spoke about in advance that, I was throwing at him, and he was either incorporating them into the script or so it was quite a fun process for me over a long period of time thinking about a film, which is happening at the moment with him as well. So yeah, it's a good relationship.
So how much prep did you then have? You say a long period of time. How long?
Well, I think I started talking to Matt about, say, through 2 years before we started shooting.
Wow.
2.5 years.
That's great. Yeah.
Matt writes precisely. So I think of actual prep. I think I finished June part 1 and went straight onto it part time, and then went full time. So yeah, regardless though, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough prep. We needed, even with the COVID shutdown, we needed more prep, because this is a film that was very precise. Like everything in this movie was incredibly precise. Even stuff that is intended to not feel precise is kind of precise, like the chase, for example. So we had to get it right. We had to make sure we got it all right.
So how did you develop the look of the film? I mean, did you storyboard the whole movie? How did that sort of develop during prep?
Matt had a fantastic art department that was leaning in heavily into 3D, the gaming engine Unreal, to build the scenes, to lens it. So I'm sure there were drawings. In fact, I can't recall if there were drawings, but I definitely know that we prevised in Unreal, and we found our lenses. And as time went on, where we started discovering what the language was, what the lens was, there's always key 1 or 2 lenses on a film. And when we discovered what that lens or key lenses were, then we started basing the Unreal projects around those lenses. They were unusual. It was an unusual format because I worked with Ari at building a set of lenses for this, and we had some unusual focal lengths. I think it was a 72 and an 88 and 108, and like there was weird focal lengths, and it was a large format anamorphic. So to know off the top of our heads what the lenses were going to be, we just didn't. I remember the first couple of days we shot with the 72 as our key lens, and then realized that it wasn't the right lens, and that the 88 should be our kind of default glass.
That's great.
Wow.
The 88.
Yeah. Not an 87.
No, an 88, much better.
You should ask your friends at Ari about that, because I don't know why it was an 88 as opposed to a 90.
Funny.
I know that the new series, the series 3, which is their commercial version, I think the 88 became a 90. I think the 72 became a 74 or something. So,
interesting. So you basically had a previs of the whole movie?
I don't think we were that disciplined. I think we would have been had we had the time. But I know that there was previs for a lot of scenes. We managed to, again, COVID helped this because we had a lot of time to sit and talk, which was good. So we didn't have the whole film specified, but we knew certain key scenes that we were going to say ring fence and create scenes amongst them in the middle of scenes, like the car chase, for example. Like we tested rigs on that, where we were strapping to motorcycles and strapping to cars. I mean, the biggest motivation I think for that was the French Connection. That the late Owen Roisman shot, who met at your house at that same time. Right, but the thing with the French Connection was it had that feeling of massive danger. And in fact, if you listen to Friedkin talk about it, I think he said he was operating in the back seat. I remember an interview, he said he was operating in the back seat because he didn't have a family, yet everybody else on the film, all the other camera operators.
Oh my goodness.
He put them in the back seat because the driver, the stunt driver, he challenged, I think he said he played with him emotionally and said he challenged and said, we haven't got the scene, your driving's not good enough. And the stunt driver, as stunt drivers maybe do, just went, well, watch this. So they had a camera, I believe, strapped to the front of the car, and he was operating a camera in the back seat. And I believe that they ran, I think they ran their block and did very dodgy things, from what I remember reading in interviews. But what it had, and I'm not justifying that, but what it had is it had an amazing sense of immediacy and danger. This camera strapped to the front of a car probably was a little bit loose, and it shook a bit and didn't have the stabilization on that you might expect modern day cameras to, and it just felt very raw. And so we ring fenced that sequence and said, all right, well, this is how we do it. We talked about hard mounts. We talked about strapping it. Even though logic says, well, if you're on a Russian arm, you get to change the angle for each setup, and it's not as long rigging time. And we set the dogma as being hard mounts that might have a little bit of looseness to them, that might shake loose. Water on the lens, it's trying to be as natural as possible, but as being controlled as possible at the same time, so that, again, no safety issues, of course, but that it felt like it was kind of, dangerous, that we're about to just break cameras.
I've got one question.
To that point, actually, sorry, James, to that point, actually, one thing we did, which I thought was fun, we actually went out and bought some old Alexas on eBay, or like some really, really old first generation Alexas. And we put smaller iron glass lenses on them, which we had rehoused. They're sort of small sphericals that we could get really close to the ground. Because I wanted to make sure that, I know everyone gets a little bit precious with cameras, especially when they're $250,000, and everyone's worried about breaking them. But I wanted to try and make sure that we had cameras that, like crash cameras, except that weren't strapped in a housing that, was still. Like, I wanted to strap these cameras to the vehicles and try and get as much immediacy because of that. It might mean that you can drop the camera a bit lower, or you can get a bit closer to another car when you're bumping it, or you can sort of put it just a little bit close to the door, and when you side swipe somebody, you might take out the camera, but the shot might be amazing up until that frame.
Would that be a big advantage of a camera like the Venice these days, because you can detach like the lens? You put that down and the main body of the camera can be in a safe place.
Totally. And we looked at tried to find some M's as well. Do you remember the M's with the detachable
Yeah.
I think what we ended up doing for a lot of it, I think we recorded externally anyway. So again, if you took the camera out, you saved the data. Or I think we had one instance where I think a truck slid a bit too far and took out the camera. But it looked great.
That's what question was. Did you take out any cameras?
Yeah, I think we did, and I was a bit disappointed every night, because the way we would do the sequence is it was done as a second unit, but we were heavily involved in every single shot. So either at night we'd sit over dinner, Matt and I, not together but separately because of COVID, and we'd be watching their feed. We'd get up in the morning, we'd see what they'd done, and we'd feed back. And I recall every morning when, obviously it's great having everyone be safe. That was always a good report, that everyone's good and safe. But when the cameras were safe, I was like, guys, you got to work harder. You got to work harder at sort of putting this thing at the camera in danger.
There's a question there.
I just want to ask one other question, actually, though. While we're on the chase, that sort of work, I mean, how did you coordinate lighting it? How do you, especially with a second unit, how do you make sure it all fits together?
Well, we had very talented people doing it. Danny Villar was my DP. Rob Alonso was the director. If I recall, so we had about, I think, three areas for the sequence. I think 3 locations for the sequence. And the last, with the big crash and the explosion, was an aircraft. I think it was an airport runway. So we had to install streetlights. So we had a company come in and put streetlights in, and I think they ran it as far as we could. We obviously had a budget. Everyone has a budget. I worked out that the streetlights need to be this far apart to make sure that if we're going at 70 miles an hour, that we don't have massive chunks of unreadable blackness, but we have enough light to come in and out. So that was all the prep work we'd done on the main unit, and we'd figured out at certain speeds. We'd done all those calculations, and then we installed them. They paid to install them. So the close-ups were a little different. We did some of the close-ups on stage on an LED volume, but we also did some for real. So again, trying to balance the second unit was interesting because you had actors in there. So it might be, for example, a shot of Colin Farrell, who played the Penguin. We were shooting the machine gun scene, and then we might have spun around to shoot Batman's reverses, and then put Colin in the car that the second unit had set up. And as we're turning around, Matt's supervising Colin's performance, either remotely or from the tracking vehicle, whilst we're spinning the unit around. So trying to be smart with that. It was imperative that we kept our eyes on it, because I think that for a film like The Batman, if you deviate even slightly from the dogma or from the vision, it's a bit of a dicky word, but if you deviate from the vision, which is really easy to do, by the way, it's like very easy to choose a slightly wider lens than you ordinarily would, because it's slightly easier to rig. It's really easy to do that. You know what? For this one shot, it's okay.
Yeah.
But it's one shot becomes 2, and then it becomes 5, and it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. So you know what it's like. When you're working on a bigger production that has more moving parts, you've got to stay more on top of the vision, and that's where it's really helpful to have incredibly good, talented people on your team as a second unit DP or as insert unit DPs that understand when you say, sorry, that doesn't work, that lens doesn't work. You've got to go again on that shot because it's not wet enough or whatever. Sorry, Jane.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think in a lot of big action movies, the second unit is definitely a stunt unit, and they have their own ways of doing things. So they have almost a different vocabulary. So I know we've come across it before when we're trying to say, no, it needs to be from the point of view of this character, but really, isn't it from the point of view of the wheel coming off or something like that? So I think oftentimes second unit is chosen by great, stunt people, but making sure that you have a person in there that understands what you're trying to go for is very important.
Yeah, I think that one of the really impressive things about the movie, I mean, apart from the lighting and everything and the staging, is how consistent it is. Like you say, there doesn't seem to be a shot that sort of stands out because it's on a wide lens when the rest isn't, or whatever. It has a real smooth consistency to it, which I find amazing, because realizing how much of a sort of jigsaw it is of different elements and shots put together in different places, it's pretty stupendous. Going back to that big car chase as we were on it, the main chase sort of sequences. Then, so how did you choose the shots? How did you choose that was the jigsaw to make it together?
You mean how do we choose the mounts, or like that?
No, just the idea of the shot. So you're going to do a close up of Colin, and then you're going to do a reverse and a low shot. I mean, how did that all? Was that all previs, or?
Yeah, a lot of that was previs, and I do recall watching a previs a number of times. But there were times that a shot was achieved, but wasn't the best shot. Like, for example, like it might have been previs on a certain lens, but there might have been a different way to rig it, like lower looking up or slightly lower. Like it's a really hard balance, because a second unit can study the previs and shoot exactly what the previs is, but that's all it is. It's an example of what it could be. So, and it helps know for visual effects too, what you need to shoot. Like, for example, if you're going to do a shot of Colin, we shot a lot of Batman, a lot of Colin in the LED volume. And when we did that, we needed to know what was the action beat happening at that point in time. Was Colin being bumped by the Batman?
Right.
So we had to shoot a plate of that. What's behind Batman when he's being fired at by the machine gun. And so it did become a bit of a game. But this is why, again, I can't speak more highly of the team that spearheaded that unit, Danny and Rob, because it's a thankless task. It's a thankless task, as you know. Like, it's like that they might think it doesn't actually matter. This is what I was talking. I think I spoke to Denis about this. It doesn't matter if you have, even if you had Spielberg directing your second unit, let's say, and I use Spielberg as an example of an amazing director. His vision would still be different to the director on the main unit, and that's not disrespecting Spielberg at all, because he's pretty great, as we know. Like, so it's more of keeping that vision very, very focused and very very immediate and not compromising at all. And that's what I loved about the Batman. That's what I loved about Matt Reeves. He, again, so many times I recall I was sitting at a pub having dinner with the family, watching an iPad as they were shooting something. I think Matt Reeves said he was in the bath, and we're all texting, and like, it was quite fun. It was quite fun. It was quite fun making a film like that.
A different way of working.
I don't know, yeah.
I don't know. Like,
can we go back a bit? Can you talk a little bit about the choice of locations? I mean, I understand you shot a lot of the exteriors in Liverpool, standing in for Gotham City, right, or something. How did you go about choosing locations, and how did you go about choosing your crew? I mean, where did everybody come from?
So it's UK based, and there's two ways to answer that. There's pre-COVID and then there's post-COVID. So pre-COVID, we had a lot of the chase happening in Liverpool, and some in Glasgow, and some in Chicago. I think there was a bit of a mixture of the three places for the chase. And also there's a fair bit of riding. Like there's motorcycle riding at the beginning of the film as he's riding home at dawn. There's the Bat-Cat chase where he's tracking her as she goes to the 44 below. I'm pushing my memory now. Anyway, there's quite a few of those sort of moving parts. And I recall we had Liverpool's dialed in. We had all the streets scouted, tunnels, everything scouted for that sequence. And then when COVID struck, it became less able to travel as a unit. So
right.
I think we pared down, and I think we still went to Liverpool, but I think in Liverpool we only shot the exterior Mayor's Memorial, the opening, the Gotham Square Garden. He's walking through at the beginning of the film, just watching and observing. I think there's when he's at the top of the tower, the clock tower. I'm probably missing something, but that's primarily what we shot up there. And it was a very, again, it's boring talking about COVID, isn't it? But it's that classic thing where we all stayed at the same hotel. No one could go out at night.
The bubble.
We had a bubble. We had a barrier here. Your rigging guys were on that side. You were on this side. You couldn't shake hands, talk.
Yeah.
Production was trying to protect their investment, quite rightly. Like, they didn't want to shut down again, as we had a number of times. So it was very, very cautious. And the same thing happened in Chicago. We had another unit shoot Chicago. It was Riley Brown, who's an Australian DP who did that for us. So we had scouted Chicago before COVID. So we knew the locations. We had another scout go out with a 3D camera, and we could scout in the goggles or on the iPad to scout the locations. And then we organized all the rigs in London. We organized the Safe 72, and it was here, and we took a photo and sent the bits. And, we tried to be as prescriptive as possible, knowing that when they were shooting the track down, the drop down as the motorcycle rides past to reveal Bella Real, that I think we had done that already on the backlot. We'd shot it already as an indicative idea of speed, and we'd put it in front of Matt and said, how's this for speed? I think, if I recall, we had Danny Villar riding a bicycle instead of the motorcycle, because that didn't involve transportation and all those other red tape things that happen on the film set. So it was very fun, like him riding a bicycle, and then the crane drops down to reveal a I don't know, a lens case or something to stand in for the post. But that's how prescriptive we were trying to be. So we were not really leaving much to chance. So that when Riley was shooting that, and we may not have been awake when he was doing that, so we couldn't have given full authority or full approval, but at least then we had our time dialed in. So we had amazing communications. We had amazing people that no egos, no one got the nose at a joint when you asked them to go again if they're excited. Like, it was just a very good bunch.
Yeah. Do you want to take a couple of questions now? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
want to. Okay, let me pull up a couple of questions about the LED volume.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a question about from Adrian. How was working with the LED volume on the Batman? Were there any particular challenges concerning that?
Well, one of the biggest challenges was actually getting to the point where we could shoot on the volume. So this is what I was saying before about the whole interactivity with Matt early on in the script writing process. I was working and developing the technology with ILM like in 2017, 2018 for Mandalorian. Yeah, there was I shot it on Rogue One. We shot a version of it on Rogue One in 2015. Over the few years after, I'd worked with ILM verbally at going, well, if we did this, we had that, like this would be the way you would shoot something for real. This is how you do a virtual stage. There's no corners, it's round. It's like so as we are doing tests on the Mandalorian, I was kind of saying to Matt, dude, there is something coming down the pipe that we've got to consider or look at. I explained to him the technology. I know that he knows Kathy Kennedy. I think he got to look at some of our tech. I'm not quite sure, but I explained to him that there was this option to which was kind of the holy grail for filmmakers, which is to shoot at over a consistent day with consistent light, which is normally not consistent, be it dawn, dusk, night. Like, trying to be consistent with the quality of light over a period of time is one of the hardest things I think we do. And very often, if we've got a long 10-page scene, we would never choose to do it over a window of 3 minutes, because then suddenly we're there for 30 days or whatever it is. So Matt had written these scenes. He'd written them precisely for the volume. I explained to him that it uses, big geometric shapes, building site. So he built that into the idea that the building site is big geometric shapes. By the time we'd shot it, ILM's technology had improved where we could do some really high-res cityscapes and some high-res kind of buildings and blinkies. And so we had kind of designed it for that purpose, and that's how it was written. And so, of course, as you go along the production process, there's always targets on certain things to try and reduce budgets. And we know how that works, where you go, all right, what target is everybody looking at? Are they looking at a location? Are they looking at a studio build? What's the target? And that was the target. And the discussion was, how do we do it if we didn't do it on the volume? And I was like, it will not work on blue screen. We cannot do this on blue screen. If we do it on blue screen, we have to change the quality of light. We have to become a little more forgiving with the type of light. We can't be so precise with the time of day. And yeah, it was great working on it. I mean, it was, I wouldn't want to do an entire film on an LED volume. It can get emotionally a little cold, you say. You don't have any of that interactivity with nature. But for the scenes that we used it for, I thought it was great. I loved shooting, a lot of those scenes were like All the President's Men. It's the kind of the deep throat kind of discussion of seeing them but not quite seeing them, having them sort of in the shadows, meeting kind of. And because we had that volume, I was able to then get, say, Jeffrey's Quayside down so low that we could just see into his eyes, just make out the emotion, but be really kind of precise with how in the dark they are.
You're talking now about
Here.
the Wayne Manor rooftop, right? Which is
This one here?
this volume setup?
Yeah. So exactly. Yeah, this is building. Exactly building. It's a. I think we called it under construction build site or something. Anyway, that's
Right.
the official.
Can you just talk about, you said, well, you couldn't do it blue screen. Can you just explain why? I mean, I've got my own opinions. I'm sure they're the same as yours, but just in your words, can you explain why it wouldn't work blue screen?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not talented enough to light that blue screen and do it well. So that's a big start. Second is, I think there was so much interactivity of the lights on
Right.
the wet floor, on off the edge of the steel pillars, off Batman's cowl. I mean, it's not a reflective cowl, but it's got something
Right.
in it, and I'm sure we could have done something close to that on a version of blue screen, but then again, all that blue bouncing around. I mean,
Yeah. No, I mean, exactly,
make
isn't it? It's a
sense.
nightmare. I mean, I don't know. So we had this problem. We were shooting on this bomber on Unbroken, remember?
Yeah.
And, everything's basically lit by the outside light in these small windows inside a bomber. And obviously we're on stage and, ILM was saying, well, we got to do a blue screen. But just as the same situation as you're facing, okay, you're shooting again, it's blue, but the only light then that's light in the set is coming off the blue screen. So how does that make any sense at all? Yeah.
And I think we're, as humans, we're very, very very able to understand when something's not quite right from a lighting standpoint. And if it's not quite natural because of all those things that make it not natural, i.e. blue screen, green screen, whatever that might be, then it becomes something that's a little tricky. I mean, we did use gray screen. So if you have a look at say 11 and 10.
Here's 11. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Sorry. 11
And-
is a different number. Sorry.
That's not 11.
Okay. Well, 10?
Maybe it's 10, 11, and 12. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So on this set, we used gray screen because the value of the gray screen was that as a default setting, we could make it the color of what was there, which was probably dark gray.
Yeah.
And if we ever needed to, like on some of the reverse shots, looking at Bruce sitting at his desk with that in the back, with all of that in the background, what we could then do, I just hit it with some blue light. So it was far enough away that I just hit the area around his head with some blue light, so that it avoided blue spill anywhere on the set except where it absolutely needed to be. So,
but it could be keyed. You could key the elements. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. And that worked really well, where we had the blue light from the LEDs creating just a key around his head and tried to put it as far away as possible. Because then, again, we're getting our values before we turned the blue screen on, which meant to our eye, it felt real or felt right. And then we turned the blue screen on. And I felt that worked better to light anything that I've done to this date, because again, you've got a blue value there. It does your head in. I can't not see blue.
It's impossible to work with it, really.
Yeah.
Going back to the rooftop, then, do you think, because you're working at such tight values in terms of shooting the close-ups, and you were saying that just the amount of light in the eye, was it an advantage? Would you have done that if you had been shooting film and you didn't have playback, you didn't have an on-set monitor? Would you have felt comfortable doing that sort of work?
I don't know. First of all, I don't know if you can shoot on film with the LED volume because there's syncing issues.
Right.
And somebody may be able to answer that. I know that I never got around to testing that when we were on Mandalorian. There was a whole laundry list of test subjects that we were talking about, like how do we make this system better? And by the time I left to do DUNE, I don't think we'd gotten around to doing film tests. Because I know that for some filmmakers, I think Spielberg was one of them at that time, I think he was considering using the technology, but was wanting to shoot on film. So I don't know if you could use that on the volume, but to the point of film as a general tool on this film, Matt and I had agreed quite early on not to use film because we felt that the digital allowed us to be as precise as we possibly could be with every single value that we were putting in there. And you know what it's like. Again, with film, there are variables that occur even after the fact with, processing issues, or, maybe the developers are a day too old and suddenly you're on the edge there, but suddenly it doesn't develop it up, or whatever. There's thousands of possible problems. And for us at that point, we wanted to be so convinced of what we were shooting that we could, well, not just sleep at night, but also be comfortable that the box we're putting each shot in is how is the place it should be.
But also, if you're watching a second unit or other people shoot it, you're watching this on a monitor later. I mean, if you're not watching the dailies, you're watching what they shot, maybe an hour or two ago or whatever. You really want that kind of confidence that what you've got that's it there, right? It's a big thing, really.
Yep.
Going back to then the volume, I mean, how did you approach then? I mean, there's basically on that rooftop, there's 3 wonderful sequences. One is kind of a grey day, and one is very much dusk, and one is kind of sunset and almost into night. How did you go about getting those backings? Because obviously, presumably, you had to oversee the way they were shot and calculate exactly what you wanted, or not?
Yeah, no, yes and no. Sorry to say no.
I'm surprised.
That wasn't plate photography. That was 3D. So this is what I'm finding really exciting about the future of cinematography. This is a bigger conversation about what is cinematography in 30 or 40
That's
or 50 years.
We can talk about whatever we want.
But all those backgrounds were built in 3D. So yes, I did have a massive hand in making sure the time of day was right, because of course it's my job. And, I had to make sure that the values were going to work for us. But we sat and designed Gotham in 3D. We sat there on the computer and we went, okay, so when we're looking at Batman looking out to Gotham, what's behind his head? Is it a big tower, a small tower? Is it an open expanse? Where's the bridge? Where's the L train set that we see later on at the Penguins at the 42 Below? Like we sort of came up with the geography of the city and worked out on each of the shots what will the background be. So we knew, if Batman was on the camera right side of the set, that what was behind his head was a highlight. Again, going back to, well, if you shoot something dark, you've got to have a highlight so that you get some depth. We made sure that every angle that we had on Batman had the right level of blinky lights, or the right level of brightness or busyness. And then the other side, we worked out what the street was doing and all the angles. We pretty much had defined all the angles, and then I went and lit in 3D. So that's what I'm finding at the moment really quite exciting about filmmaking, because 3D, we're not beholden to nature. I love nature. I love shooting in nature, and I love shooting actors in nature. But then there are some things you're standing there. I mean, I seem to recall photos of you guys on 1917 going like, where are the clouds? Like,
yeah.
So when you're beholden to nature, you feel as a DP like you're the, I won't use swear words, but you feel a bit like you're the nice person.
Everybody is looking at you.
Yeah.
And it's all your fault that you're working a 12-hour day. Yeah. Or 15 hours, whatever.
So when you're in 3D, you can, as a DP, you can choose exactly the time of day that you shoot. You can, like, for example, in that I could choose exactly where the sun was. I'm not beholden to going, all right, we have to shoot this way in the morning and this way in the afternoon. I can move the sun. In Batman's reverses, I can put the sun over there, and a bit higher to crack through the building
Yeah.
to give him a bit of an edge.
Yeah.
And it was all done in advance because there wasn't much, it all had to be rendered and baked in. But soon it'll be that we can do that on the fly. So you can sit there with your Unreal person, your computer person, in the same way that you sit there with your dimmer board up and you move the sun. You change the value of the sky, it's infinitely adjustable, and the control is incredible. But the flip side is when if you can combine that control with other things that you don't have control, like real nature, real actors, real performances, then hopefully you get the best of both worlds.
Interesting. But then also there's it is probably, as you say, a longer conversation, but then there is the computer-generated actors as well, that if you go online, you can watch certain actors, not actually saying what you think they're saying because they look so real. These images look so realistic. I find that kind of scary, but maybe that's a longer conversation.
It's insanely scary. And if you have a conversation with actors about that, which I have, it's a reality that's coming forward. And eventually, it's not just actors being portrayed without their consent. It's people developing characters that are as real as actors are with performances, but they're being controlled and owned like a cartoon character because then they're being owned by a corporation. So you might have a leading man or woman who is not real, who is controlled and operated by. Now, again, good or bad, I don't think this is. There are going to be pros and cons of that because people will make great films that way, and they'll tell great stories with that. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not a strong advocate. I won't never be an advocate of that because I always believe in that power of the actor and the performance. I've worked with enough, as you guys have, to know that there is nothing that you can replace with an incredible performance.
That's what you're going for.
It's
when
different
you're
art form. Yeah.
But for me, there's also that experience. I mean, for me, working on a film is a life experience. It's not just trying to produce, help a director tell a story. Frankly, I enjoy the moment. I enjoy the interaction with the actors. I enjoy the interaction with the real world and the crew. I mean, yeah, interesting.
It's going to be part of my interest in learning more about the technology is learning how to use it in a positive way for the films that I want to make and the directors that I want to work with want to make. Do you know what I mean? Like the Matts and the Denise and the Jim Campions and I want them to be able to sort of go, interesting. Okay, yeah. I think this is why maybe the Batman is a good example where Matt's all about performance. He's all about performance and he will never compromise the performance ever. But he also understands the emotional impact of a time of day that can come in to a scene. And this is why people shoot at dawn and dusk and just into sunrise, because there's something emotional we get from nature at that time of day. And it translates through performance and through the camera. And so by using this technology to remove any of the obstacles, I think that's maybe a positive aim, but also understanding the technology enough that it doesn't become the job of somebody else to do it who is not a cinematographer. The fear that I have, and again, philosophical, I don't know, is that if we as cinematographers don't understand and embrace it, not necessarily use it, but understand and embrace it,
right,
then the people that will understand and embrace it are people that like gamers or people that don't have an aesthetic that's. So our job as a cinematographer, our role as a cinematographer will become washed out. It'll become given to other people whose priority is not to maintain a vision. So the only way we can do that is through knowledge. The only way we can do that is through understanding as much as, if not more than, everybody else. So we can be the leading voice in a room of this is how it should be done.
Right, exactly, because you're the one that is showing there's this wonderful technology, but how it should be used in order to make the better film. Because just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, but indeed that piece of technology actually could allow you to do something completely different. So, yeah.
Totally.
It was interesting.
And I'm really excited.
When we first got into...
excited by it.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
No, sorry.
No.
But this is where I'm excited about different brains coming into this technology and using it in ways that I haven't thought about. Like finding some directors who would never consider shooting on a volume, and then they understand it, or they understand what stories can be told in 3D or on a volume. It's been fun watching people like Spielberg do like Ready Player One, where he gets to explore different mediums.
It was interesting. We came at it a different direction, because when we got started to get involved in animated work, the first film we worked on was Wall-E, and it was like at that time Andrew Stanton wanted to bring live action into animation, into cartoon animation, and then that sort of just developed, and it was always a thought, wasn't it? It was always our thought that the two, live action and animation, would meld together. But we were coming from the animation world, and you've come from very much the film and the LED technology, and coming to the same place. But they are actually, Batman, I think, is a fantastic example of where they're almost now inseparable. Because I could not tell I've been looking at some of your location some of the photographs you sent, and I could not tell where the real set ended and the virtual set, began. It's that to that point. Can we go back? Maybe we should just break down something.
Roger, thank you.
Well, maybe we should just break down something. There's a shot here of two trucks in the rain.
Oh, 8.
Number 8.
Number 8, yeah.
Yep.
I think this is an example of you saying where you're using a gray screen as a backing, right? Yep. And you're shooting all the foreground action against a gray screen. Can you talk about this, the choice of this, and where I can't remember exactly what this led to. I think it's a bike chase, is it?
Yeah, it's Catwoman Zoe arriving on a motorcycle, getting off, scoping, and leaving. So this was at an old this location where we shot that chase, and the whole penguin thing was at a place called Corriton, which is I think it's an old oil refinery or something, East London. And so when we had shot that, again, that was pre-COVID. Again, the reason I'm defining pre and post-COVID is because the rules changed dramatically. It was pre-COVID, just pre-COVID, but I recall it was so cold that we couldn't. I don't think the actors could act. They can always act, but I remember going with the rain. Even though the rain was slightly heated, we couldn't heat it too much, otherwise it would steam. It was one of those times. So what we did is we did the bulk of the wides and the bulk of the things that needed to be done there, and we pulled close-ups and performance beats back onto stage, and we just tried to fudge the backgrounds with light sources, vehicles, bins. So we tried hard, and I don't think we did any blue screen on this scene. We kept it as grey, and the grey was super handy for us. Like, I think that grey traveled with us onto almost every set, because it became so useful in that we could, if there was a point where Dan Lemon, our VFX supervisor, went, I can't key that, we just put a cream source vortex into the grey and made it pure blue. It gave them enough of a keying opportunity. So
we did the same thing on Blade Runner. We just used grey, and even when we had rain and snow. I see you had rain on that. Were they able to key the rain off the grey?
I assume so. That's probably a question for Dan. I didn't get into I didn't get into that.
It is amazing. I'm asking a question. I kind of know the answer because it is amazing what they can do. Many years ago, we shot on film a Jarhead, and we shot out in the middle of the desert. It was meant to be underneath the oil wells. So the effects on-set guy burnt all these tires to get this black smoke. We used blackened vegetable oil for the rain towers. The whole immediate area was black, right, and shiny. We put up a couple of flares, like fires, as though they were oil rigs burning. But out beyond, there was bright sunlight. And they still managed to key all the kind of rain, or the black oil, falling down in frame. Obviously, they probably added some more, but also extend the background. So, I mean, that was how many years ago? And it was filmed. So, I mean, it is amazing what can be done now. Yeah.
I recall hearing a story. I think that I threw a few curveballs to the VFX guys and girls.
It's always fun, isn't it?
Because I remember and I think they've spoken about this at some of their bake-offs, but during the car chase, we had a whole series of clear filters with silicone on them because I love it when the rain hit the filters. But the problem is that if it hit the filters, it would very quickly become mush. You couldn't see anything. So we had an air blower, but if it air blued, then you didn't get any water on the lens. So I found some filters that I put some silicone on, and they had to recreate those because the car chase, and this is what's really interesting about the car chase, is there are shots in the car chase that are 100% CG that you would not pick, not you, anybody. I wouldn't pick. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it. And there are some shots that are totally not CG that you would think are CG because they're so complex. The car in the rearview mirror coming through the flames is 100% real. I don't know if they even augmented it.
Wow.
But then there are some other shots.
That does surprise me because that whole sequence with the car coming through the flames. What about the later part where Colin's upside down, Penguin's upside down in the car, and you get this beautiful upside down shot of Batman coming out of the flaming background? Was that real, or was that how much was CG?
No, it's pretty much in camera. I think that
that is an amazing little sequence. That is an amazing. It's the most stunning sequence I've seen this year for sure. Anyway.
I agree. Listen, I think the only thing that was replaced in that, again, I'm talking without authority, but I think the only thing that was replaced was the cape. Very often we would find issues getting the cape looking good because if it was too light to get the wind blowing on it, it would look like paper.
Yeah.
If it was too heavy, look like leather, then it wouldn't blow. So I recall consistently we were replacing capes, but I think VFX companies can do that in their sleep now. I mean, every superhero film has a cape that they replace, so I don't think that's a problem.
That's funny.
Yeah, but that's awesome that you didn't know that the cape was CG, but yeah, it was pretty much all in camera. I mean,
wow.
Again, that goes back to the power of also a good team as well, because that sequence was being done simultaneously to our shoot, but obviously Rob was there and Colin was there, and it was being obviously directed by Matt and DP'd by me, but Danny Villa, Rob Alonso. It was just a good team, a good all-around team that were heading those things up.
But okay, just to get back to what we were talking about just briefly, if you were doing Batman again, do you think you would still shoot so much live? Talking about the way you've been talking about what can be done in a computer now. I mean, why would you go out and spend all this money on something?
Because it's fun.
Well, I would, because it's fun. I wouldn't want to do it any other way. But I mean, just in terms of
try telling more about
money.
this accounting department.
Yeah, right. They didn't find it fun.
I don't think there's anything in that film that I would do differently now based on the current technology that exists right now. I've not seen or been privy to or worked on anything that would be different, that would do anything in that film differently. I think there's maybe one or two sequences that I won't get into, which we might have done on blue screen, which I really wish we hadn't done on blue screen, and I wish we had figured out a better solution for that. But I think for the most part, 98% of the movie I would do probably similarly. I wouldn't do it much different. But what was really fun, and I was just texting somebody about this, but because we went to the film out, it's like we did on June. On June, we went to Neg. On this, because I had Matt early, we tested going to an egg and then skip bleaching the egg and then pulling it. We skip bleached it, pulled it 1.5 stops, and then did an IP. And that became what our look was, which was a skip bleached negative and then a normal interpositive. And so because we had the look worked out, and Photochem did all the heavy lifting on that because they were able to experiment and their scientists got in, we were able to come up with a look, in which case we created a LUT for that look, which meant that on set, we knew exactly what that film process was going to give us. So we were looking at an electronic version of the final movie, but when they did the final movie, they'd done enough of the science, hocus pocus, to know that it would translate exactly the same way. So all the colors would behave the same way, all the oranges would behave the same way.
Okay, then if you put those two versions, the digital version and the film version, on the screen and A and B them, what would be the difference? Because you said you created a LUT to create this look, but then you went and did it photochemically. I'm not sure. What was the difference?
Well, the difference is resolution. So it's a bit of a, I was watching, again, go back to, let's see, use the French Connection as an example, or the President's Men as an example. There are times that in 1971, Owen was lighting in a fluorescent, like a garage, for example. And I could tell that because of the technology, the fact that he had to go to an egg, then to a print, then screen, that he chose to use slightly harder light than what is there, because he had to create a little bit more contrast so that these wide shots that they did in the garage don't become mush once you use your 35 mil at T2.8, so the technology at that point in time meant that, say, he might have had to have used slightly harder light to create edges. The film out process for us allowed us to pick and choose our resolution. So, for example, there's a shot in the mayor's mansion near the beginning of the film where he's watching TV, and he's in the dark except he's lit by a TV light, and we're white, we're full body plus. So when we went to the print, that shot was soft. Like it was that type of thing you see in the cinema and you're like, oh, focus puller's having a bad day. But it's not the focus puller, it's the resolution of the output. Yeah. So on that shot, we went back to the negative as opposed to the positive. So we went down, we increased our resolution one step. So then the close-up was back to the positive. And I think there was one shot or two shots that we went back to the digital negative. And that was because I think he's riding towards Wayne Tower and we needed to read Wayne Tower on the building.
Wow.
And we went back to the negative for that one shot so that the resolution set in. So that's a long way of answering a question. I didn't really answer it, but what do you get differently? Well, you lose resolution, which I'm sure there's an algorithm to do. I'm positive, but I've never seen it work. You get a little bit of natural gate weave, which again, I'm sure you could do digitally, but I've never seen it perform the way it should. I don't know, there's something, it does something to the highlights, like when you go to film, it does something to the highlights on digital. And that's what I feel, again, we all have a different opinion on the pros and cons of film v digital. But I feel with highlights in digital, we might have lost something that film gave us. And I feel like it gives us back highlights, some softness or something.
What I love is that you guys took the time to figure I mean, most of the time they want one solution, but you were willing to say, okay, this scene works better if we do this process, but this close-up is better if we don't do that. I think that's great. I mean, normally in post, it always seems like they're so rushed that we just have to make that date, and they want to go the quickest way possible.
You know, it's true, and it was very hard. Oh, sorry, Roger. It was very hard to. It's hard to educate people higher up the food chain in terms of the studio system. We had a fantastic VFX soup on this one who's done a lot of film with Nolan and Tarantino, so she was fully on board. She understood, she could see it. But then you look at the numbers and you show somebody the numbers and the time and the schedule shift exactly, and they go, well, why?
Yeah, right. I mean, nobody's going to notice that. They say.
We shot the film for that purpose. We made sure that our center frame of our lenses was sharper than I would ever shoot, because I knew that we were going to lose resolution. So we tuned those lenses so the center was sharper than I would ever allow my lenses to be.
Right.
Knowing that, yes, when we went to a neg or a positive, that suddenly these soft highlights on the edge of a cowl don't ping nearly as much as they did on the digital version.
Right.
That's really interesting. I would go back to the shot, the upside down shot of Batman and the fire beyond him, the burning truck. Could you, I mean, certainly in the 60s, you couldn't have shot that shot to be that clean. And then certainly now, depending on the lens you use, it would have a very different, that backlight and that silhouette would look very differently. If I'd have shot that on the lenses I was using when we shot Jarhead, which had a lot of flaming backgrounds, I would not have got that cleaner a silhouette and those amazing clean reflections in the ground. So it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Owen couldn't have shot that shot to look that way with the equipment he had.
This is where I must say, like, it's a very philosophical discussion about what era of photography is kind of the best era. At what era did we peak as a human race in the photography department? And I would argue, let's have a beer and talk about this. I would argue that by the late 70s, we had, I say we as a group, I was watching cartoons at that point in time, but as a group, we had learned all the best things, how to tell stories through sophisticated filmmaking, but not pushing it too far. It feels like that was kind of the apex. Again, I'm happy to be discussed about this. It feels like that was the apex of the learning process, and that everything from there was people either trying to make it better, which never did. It was always like it was more colorful, or it was more whatever. So it feels like that was technologically, it wasn't the apex though. Technologically, it was kind of we're in it now. We're dealing with sharper, better, cleaner, clearer, everything. All those problems of film and cameras and flare we've solved. And so I guess sometimes trying to put some of those back. This is where in that sequence, that was an alpha. That was an ARRI alpha lens. But we had the option in that sequence, and I saw a question here about why do we use the Helioses? And we use the Helios sphericals because, for a couple of reasons. I think they're incredibly good lenses, that they're beautiful. They fall off, and the quality is stunning. We had them as crash lenses, but ultimately we used a lot of these lenses for real. Like the shot of Colin in the foreground and him starting to come through the fire, that was a Helios, I think maybe it was a Jupiter 85 on a 65mm camera, but we used it because they were better, because they were better for that shot and that sequence. So we had a few lens options. So for example, in that shot, if it was double flaring or it was creating filter kickback or something, we could solve it through a different series of lenses. So yeah, control. It's all about control. I mean, film is, again, it's more controlled than any other film I've ever done.
You think there's a danger of the technology leading the process?
Yep.
I mean, that's what you're
100%.
saying basically about the development of movies and movie making to the 70s. And technology has kept going, and we're at an amazing stage where obviously, we can do things like we did on 1917, and you can do these sort of things with LED volumes and stuff. But are we actually furthering the way of telling stories with images in terms of what you do with the camera, how you move it, how you've worked with Denis so much that you can shoot a wide shot and a scene can play for a very long time. It becomes something really interesting if used in the right place at the right moment,
Yeah. I mean, I think if we, again, it's all philosophical, isn't it? But if we don't use technology for the sake of using the technology, if we don't use a large format just because it's there and it's the hot new thing, if we don't strap, I mean, I haven't seen Top Gun yet, but from what I have seen of Top Gun, like he's used that technology of the Venice for incredible results.
Yeah,
Like
it's amazing.
Do you do that on every? Do you do that and strap that to every car shot you do? Like, do you do a driving scene and do you do that? Like, is it, or do you go back to what Owen did on the French Connection, and do you go handheld in the back seat?
In the back seat, yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, and there's no right or wrong answer but just because you can strap a camera in front of an actor driving, do you do that?
Yeah.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, yeah. I think you
don't
get
know.
very aware, certain films, you get very aware that you're putting the audience somewhere they couldn't possibly be. I've always felt that. I mean, there's certain films, well, like Batman, for instance, as well, you're pushing the boundaries of reality, obviously, because there's a guy in a cape flying around the city. But on a film like Lion or something you did, I mean, to stretch where you can put the camera, that's why it was kind of so nice the way you shot that, because you're kind of not shooting it like a documentary, but it is kind of, it's based in reality where you can be. I think that there's a difference, isn't it, like, stylistically on the kinds of films and how far you can stretch what the camera does.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's nice to, I mean, for us anyway, going back to those films in the 70s, it was nice to kind of come up with the rules that they had, and, the no Technicrane, the no stabilized head, tools, simple tools to create simple moves, and, no FPVs. I mean, we know, like, you've seen those drones, those tiny little drones that can create images that are beyond this world. But again, what value does that have in the cinema universe? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, for some film, it may need that. You may have that movement, that crazy kind of FPV style movement. But there are other movies that you treat this camera like it's a refrigerator, the size of a refrigerator, which is what they were in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about the scene, the Gotham Square Gardens scene, because that was amazing, and how you approached it. And I mean, that was a big scene, and how long it took to shoot, how much prep did you have to do, how much is augmented with visual effects, how much was real.
So this is, you're talking about the outside of the Gotham Square Gardens, which are the
Number
shot
two here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this was one of those interesting COVID discussions. So the location that we had chosen for the Gotham Square Garden was in Chicago, and it was I can't recall the name of the building now, but it was a building in Chicago, and we were planning on shooting a lot of this in Chicago when we had the opportunity to, but because of COVID, because we were not going to Chicago, we had to build this in Cardington. We had Cardington for a big part of our shoot. So we effectively had to create this look in that area that looked like it was in Chicago. and it was a significant rig. I mean, it's I don't think that shot shows a quarter of the lights we put up. We put up single DS1s, which are small 4-inch by 4-inch lights, but we had a lot of them to create effectively a sky dome, so that when you look up, that area you put the fluorescence from the building opposite, and that side you put the fluorescence from the building in Chicago, and then straight up you put the bounce that hits the clouds from the city, which is an orangey kind of color. So that's where it was really fantastic to have such great LEDs that you could pixel map, and you could choose areas that could be different colors that could feel real. Otherwise, you put non-changeable lights like tungsten, for example, and then you're stuck with the color that they are, which in some cases might be good, but in this case, wasn't right. So we were able to kind of create this big softbox that we shot a couple of scenes in. I think we shot Gotham Square Gardens, and we also shot the exterior of the Mayor's Memorial after the car hit. So the outside was all the police gathered, and there was a whole dialogue. So we shot that out there as well, because we could, again, create the softbox to be the same color as the dusk at the same time that we shot the wide. So we took all the readings, took the color temperature, took the level, and then we just matched it on stage. It was quite effective, actually. And it's quite effective because it means, again, you're not bound by the time outside at dusk. You're not having to light that.
What drew you to that array of individual lights? You didn't have any diffusion under it. I notice a lot of the time you'll use a big diffuse source, or you'll use a big bounce source.
Yeah.
But this is all a lot of individual lights.
Yeah, we did though. We did on this. I couldn't find an image of that, but yes, we did on this. We had a very big diffusion.
Oh, underneath that.
Yeah.
Underneath that rig, right.
My fear with that though was that instantly you put a diffusion under it and it creates false lighting values, because it creates a bounce, doesn't it? Like, you can put light through it, but then suddenly everything that shoots up at it creates a bounce effect, which automatically is incorrect. So in this scene, I just lived with the bounce. But in the scene, I think at the train station where he gets into the fight, we put the diffusion, same system, but then we put, I think, double nets in front of it. So it would, of course, reduce the light coming through, but would also reduce the amount of bounce hitting it and then coming back. So, and that was a smaller set. So whereas this one was a massive, I don't think we had enough double nets in the Northern Hemisphere to do that. So I think it was that. I could be wrong. I'm sort of probably speaking out of turn, but that's what I remember the theory was.
Again, talking about that train station, we want to get back to the gardens, I guess, in a minute and talk about that. But the train station, you say the fight was done as an element on stage under that lighting situation. So what was inside the tube train? What was the rest of the train station?
Well, again, that was all on stage. So again, I'm bored of saying pre-COVID and post-COVID, but pre-COVID there was different idea. We were in the train in Chicago, and they get out in Chicago. Anyway, there was a different scenario. There was always going to be that fight on stage at Leavesden, because we knew we needed the control. We needed them to see Batman. He needed to be dark. I needed full control. We couldn't win it in Chicago over 2 night shoots. This had to be full control. So we always knew that section was going to get built, because again, it's the first reveal of Batman. We're paying off the whole idea that he lives in the shadows. He is the shadows. It has to be dark enough that he comes from blackness and then hits the light, but not in a way that like he's coming into a slash of light, because otherwise it's like, ta-da, here he is. Had to be subtle, like squint and you miss it. And so there was always a point where we were going to have the station built, and then some of it shot practically, and we ended up being able to do it all on stage.
Oh, I see. Right. How do you work?
Again,
How do you?
Dom Tui built a nice
Yeah.
movement rig. As you know, Dom Tui built a nice movement rig for the train, so it felt like there was multiple carriages, and it felt like everyone was moving at the same time, and it was really an effective cheat, I think.
It certainly was. It was brilliant. How do you work with your gaffer? I mean, how do you do a lot of lighting diagrams for something like that? How do you decide on the practical sources in shot and then what additional light you're going to put up?
Well, I have an incredibly good gaffer, Jamie Mills, who is very attentive and also is very he's very understanding when I start talking about my concern about the bounce, as I was just saying. You know, like standing there looking at the artwork, looking at the practicalities, and going, yeah, but if we put diffusion up there, it's going to bounce all the light back, and then it's going to feel wrong. Like he's going to have a big diffuse, like a big soft area on his head, and it's going to feel wrong. Because you know the whole idea of this film was that it did not feel film lit at all, like completely natural city lit, and to the point of no softboxes, etc. So that was my major concern. I was like, all right, well, we could solve that by then putting a solid up above him, but then he doesn't get light on him. How do we get light? Anyway, that whole thing. So we, through Jamie and Ben, his rigging gaffer, we tested. You know, we tested, and that rig, that Gotham Square Garden rig, again was a feat of rigging. It was an absolute feat of. It was a marvel. I mean, what would be easier is just to put all the heads up but further apart. But I really requested that the DS6s, I think they took DS6s apart, rigged individual heads, all so I could pixel map them. And again, I think it just takes a very understanding crew that realize that you're aiming for something that if something's not quite right, that it actually affects you emotionally, not angry. You know that it's just not. And so having that backup and that understanding was really important. And yeah, I mean, we did diagrams. I mean, the guys did diagrams. I approved them. We did pre-lights. Like it was, I don't know. It was a good relationship, and I'm proud of Batman because we lived on the edge every day, you know, and we lived right on the edge of it being a failure. So yeah, the guys did so well.
But do you choose the units that you're going to use? I know you do a lot of experiments with LED lamps and you have favorites, and so do you choose the actual fixture you use? I notice in that same image in the background you've got a rig of space lights. I presume they're LED space lights, but you know, why one from the other? And is that your choice, or do you sit with the gaffer and discuss the kind of look you want and the best way to create it?
Yes, 100%. I'm a little bit of a broken record when it comes to the quality of light that these things put out, and so every time I start talking about it, the air gets sucked out of the room. Everybody just goes,
here he goes again.
Talking about that again. There he goes. But here's the thing: every job I do, I try and retest the lights to make sure that my belief is still the same, that I'm not biased, because we all have unconscious bias and conscious bias, and that's what makes everybody different, is that their bias is different and they have different opinions. There are certain key lights that I love. Digital Sputnik's one, Cream Source Vortexes are another. The quality of light from those ones are fantastic. I've just used the new Aperture lights, Hudson Spider for LEDs. It's very important to me that I get the right fixtures. Very important. And it's very important that I. But going back a step to that though, the problem is that all these fixtures often look like film fixtures, and so like just to change the subject a little bit. If you go to shot, Oh, it's not here. No. So at the club, we had to create a blinder, a big blinder wall, and for the life of us, we couldn't find enough lights that didn't look like film lights. So we just bought 1K floodlights from the B&Q or wherever it was, and we bought like 100 of them to create a big blinder light. So that was where I deliberately used fixtures that were non-film fixtures to create a look that didn't feel like a film light. Do you know what I mean? Like it was to create something that felt more organic. And so the lights that I am using feel to me more organic, including the LEDs.
So actually, that's interesting. Talking about that, how does it evolve? The choice of putting that light, that system there, or for instance, in the Wayne's Manor workshop, where there's a big kind of rig in shot over the Batmobile.
Oops, that's not it.
That's number
Is it
10
this one?
would be fine. Yeah, well, that one or number 10 you could see a bit closer.
Okay.
So how does it evolve that those are the lights you choose? I mean, you obviously must work with a set dresser and everybody about how the set's going to be lit.
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, I could be wrong, but from the artwork, above that area of the stairs, there was like a small lobby, like an illuminated lobby. And so I wanted that to be fluorescent. Again, I love fluorescent lighting. Like there's something about fluorescent lighting that's incredible. And it's very hard to mimic, even with LEDs, I think. But I think up there we put tons and tons and tons of fluorescent lights to create a bit of a wash, as if it's coming from the small lobby. And then we're able to sort of increase the level so that it could kick deeper into the room. And I think that's what effectively that diffusion is getting a little bit of the fluorescence from that lobby area, as well as a touch more fill from, I think they're cream source space lights.
Right.
Above.
But the lights over the Batmobile, the ones that are in picture under the roof.
Oh yeah.
How does that come about? The choice of practicals and where you put them. I mean, how closely do you work with art department about those sort of things?
I mean, super close. I mean, Lee Sandel's was the set deck. I mean, I specified what the lights needed to be. Like they had to be fluorescent because again, I didn't want it to be warm and lovely and glowy and like a tungsten. It shouldn't have been that. It needed to be commercial garage. And so that's where I mean, again, any opportunity I have to use fluorescent, I'll take it. And I took it. So they sourced some really lovely fixtures that sat in frame.
So they are actually fluorescent lights rather than LEDs pretending to be fluorescents.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Because I've never been able to find the LEDs that kind of work and get the same color. I mean, I did use space lights here, cream source space lights, and I did match them to eye. So that was possible. Sometimes with that, I get a gray ball, like the VFX gray balls. Yeah. And then put a fluorescent on one side and then an LED on the other, and then just dial it to eye rather than use the meter. But in that case, wherever I can use fluorescence, I 100% will, because I just believe that they offer something different.
But there's such a convenience about, say, an Astera tube, which, I mean, on Empire, I didn't use fluorescence. I used Asteras and just dialed in the color. I mean, I love fluorescence. I love you can get like a dozen fluorescents from the same box and they all look different. They're all different. Slightly different color. And I kind of like that inconsistency. But you can still do that with an Astera and just dial it in now. You don't find what's the other one? The double rainbow. Have you used those at all? There's a LED called a double rainbow, which is really pretty wonderful. I mean, the trouble is usually, isn't it, the color, the spike is very tight, so you don't get that kind of the depth of the color. But I don't know. I was using them quite a lot. Yeah,
it's really, I don't know. I mean, I love those Asteras, and I think Aperture have some fantastic little tubes and MC units, small little kind of
Yeah.
units like that you can just put in little places to pick up lights. And they are invaluable because you have full control, as you know. You can go down to 1%. You can, change the color on a dime. I think in an instance for me on that set, because I knew that they were going to be fluorescents, that I was never going to have to alter the color. Like I wanted them to be the centerpiece of the whole set. So I made them fluorescents. I think they were dimmable fluorescents too.
Right.
But then everything else dialed into that. So everything else became, they worked around that color, including, any of the tungsten bulbs that we used. I'm not sure. Again, I'm probably talking in a turn. It was a long time ago that we shot this, but I think we used color changeable tungsten bulbs sometimes. And so, yeah, I wanted that to be the driving force. I wanted the light for that set to be primarily from above the car and maybe from the lobby above, but everything else needs to fall off into darkness. But yeah, I don't know. I sometimes like using some of those older fixtures as well. I mean, one of the fun parts, sort of fun, was on the Mayor's Memorial, the interior set, which is there's an above shot, shot 3.
Yeah.
So this is a great shot, so high, like it. Cardington, if anybody knows, Cardington used to be an airship hangar. So I think you can go to like 150 feet high. So this set now looks tiny compared to what it actually was. But this set was interesting because we had a lot of days on this. It involves, in the story, he arrives. There's a car that crashes. There's a bomb threat. So we were on this set a lot, and we had to create the light from each of the ends, from the windows, and they're big cathedral sort of lighting sources. And this is where, again, I would have loved to have used LEDs because, again, less power, more control, but we just didn't have enough of them and they just didn't exist. So we used number 14 and 15. We used Dinos, full Dinos with half blue to at least get the color not tungsteny, but a little bit cool. Then we could I think we blue filtered the camera as well to just increase the level of the coolness, just as if it's coming from skylight and there's no sun, it's just coming from gray skylight. Every time I walked past this set though, I'd always be like, oh no, I could just hear the generators like purring away.
Yeah. The heat of those things.
I mean, for somebody who likes driving an electric car to feel like I'm saving, carbon emissions. Quite guilty.
But we had the same trouble on 1917. We only had one big lighting rig, but we tested these LED equivalents of maxi brutes and that, but and Dinos, but we couldn't get enough of them. So I mean, I was quite glad in the end because.
Tell me that rig again. That was the Dino. Was it the same? Was it Dinos?
That was all Dinos, maxis, 9 lights. We had every kind of par light you could get of that quality in England. We had it like everything. And certainly we had all the 18 light maxis, Dinos, 12 light maxis, 9 light phase, everything, But I loved it because when you dim a tungsten lamp, it automatically goes warm. So you can go into that and when you do a chase on it or a fade on it, it will change color as it goes up and down. I love that. It looks so much more dramatic and real to me than, I mean, obviously you can program an LED, but it never looks quite the same. Maybe I try it again now, but I don't know. I love those maxis.
I think there's also an issue with LEDs. And again, I can't speak for every LED out there, and I'm sure there are LED manufacturers sending me daggers right now. There's also a point as you dim an LED down where it gets to a level where it just turns off. Whereas the decay of tungstens, and in fact, we looked at your rig I think in pictures from 1917 when we were building this rig at the nightclub. It's that 1K tungsten rig. because we looked at using Dinos or 9 lights as our blinding rig, but felt because it was going to be in camera and it was a prop effectively at that point, that it looked like a film set or a film light.
Yeah.
But I loved the way that those tungstens decayed. Like they come on super fast, but they don't turn off super fast, because when there's that much power being drawn, it just takes time to dim down.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that was a beautiful rig, an amazingly big rig. Biggles did that, right?
Biggles, yeah, John Higgins, yeah. It was pretty brilliant. That's why I like the open face 2K blonde as well, because if you dim that, use that as firelight as a sort of bounce off a stipple reflector or something. As you say, the decay, you might turn it off, but the bulb takes a while to cool down, so you get that wonderful kind of warmth as it cools. Hard to program an LED to do exactly that, I think, really.
I think I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I think it's really hard. You're right. It becomes, but then it becomes a series of, is it right or not? Then you can go, well, no, it doesn't do that. This does this, and there's different opinions can come into it. Whereas if it's a tungsten, it is what it is. And
I must say, I did enjoy using LEDs this last film because the control I had. I mean, I hardly used her. I mean, I used the odd Maxi Brute, I suppose, a few, and I used a couple of HMIs, but mostly it was all LEDs. And the floor lights we had were Filex. Have you used Filex?
He's saying, what's your LED of choice? He's
Filex, yeah, the Filex. I mean, the LEDs, we used strips and asteras and these double rainbows and all sorts on the rigs, you know, what was built into the location or set. But on the floor, I was using the Filex, which I think is really quite brilliant, actually. The first one I've seen that's equivalent to a PUP, you know, or a 2K.
Yeah. I have tested though; they're really good. They're solid.
Yeah,
they're solid, solid, aren't they?
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time for DPs, because there's so many options now for different types of LED lighting. And it's like we just used recently on another movie, which is we're not talking about, but the Aperture 1200s, which are super punchy lights. Like they're again, I can't remember, but equivalent of like a 5 or a 10K in terms of output. But I remember we had 50 of them, and just the amount of power that comes from them is incredible. And it's that they were not full color spectrum, but I think they were just daylight. But just the ability to dim and the lack of heat. There's still heat, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's huge advantage to, as you say. I mean, sometimes you like the lamp to dim and go warm if it's tungsten, but like we were talking about firelight or something. But most of the time, you want to dim it instead of putting a wire on, because it's a lot quicker. You can control a whole number of lights rather than a spark walking around with a whole lot of wires and screwing each lamp. That's like painful. Well, it seems painful now. It used to be fun, but it's too much pressure these days.
So how do you work then? Because if you're operating, because on Batman I didn't operate, which was probably one of the first films I didn't operate.
Oh, wow.
Was it multiple camera, Greg? Did you shoot with a lot of cameras?
We had two teams, but we rarely shot 2 cameras at the same time on the drama.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, it looked so precise. It didn't feel like you were. Yeah.
No, Julian Mawson was our B camera operator. Jason Ewart was our A camera. And very often our B camera, or Julian, would shoot inserts for us or pickups. This goes back to what we're talking about, having a really solid group of DP collaborators that we could allow the time and the resources to shoot. You know, there's so many pickups to get. There's cards, there's clues, there's cutaways. Like everything in this movie is, like even look at Riddler's apartment. There's photos that we had to shoot. There's, news coverage that we had to film. Like there's so much complexity within just a frame.
Mm-hmm.
So having a good team, say Julian doing that, there's a scene at the beginning of the film or the light bulb comes on, and it's written in the script that the gases start to illuminate in the bulb. It's a beautifully written script. I mean, Matt Reeves is an amazing writer. It's an amazingly written sequence where it talks about the gases in the bulb starting to explode and then coming on, and the water hitting the surface of the light and bubbling away as if it's a really hot light. So beautifully written script that I realized that we couldn't achieve in the 2 hours that we probably could be allocated it as a main unit, because that's how it goes, as you know, like you've got to get it done to make the days. So I had an older assistant, he's not old, young old assistant of mine, Fraser Rigg, who's now shooting, come in, and again he could work beside us with the resources that we had. He could be testing, how hot does the glass have to get in order for the water to evaporate. He could do all the R&D and then ultimately shoot that with the special effects department, heating it up, dropping water, getting close-ups. And we were quite fortunate. That's where I guess the ability to have, on a bigger movie, you do get the resources to be able to make decisions like that, where, you've got a 30-day schedule. I mean, you might have an insert day or an insert hour or something,
right,
but you don't get a chance to finesse to that degree. And that's where I think we had a really great ability to do that.
How long was your shooting schedule? I know you had to close down a couple of times, but
I think it was 100+ days. I mean, it got, I mean, we obviously closed for COVID, and then Rob went down with COVID as well. So it was 100+ days, and we had a second unit, and it was slow going. Post COVID, so it was like wading through mud, wasn't it? Like just every shot. I couldn't be on set for any longer than a certain amount of time. Otherwise, I'd be exposed if I was positive, or exposing if I was positive. So we were working a lot intense, which goes against my natural instinct.
But just in a general way, would you say you prefer working on a movie with less complexity in terms of technology and effects on one on which you might operate, or do you prefer having all this amazing palette and equipment to work with?
that's a good question.
It's a good question, because the last few films that I've done have been a little more complicated in terms of that.
Just a little, yeah.
Just slightly, yeah.
Sorry, just yes, a little bit. No, I think it's a balance. I mean, ultimately, it's the script, it's the actor, and it's the camera, right? So everything else is noise. If the character's not saying the right thing at the right time in the right way, then there's no point in even doing it. So I do love the intimacy of and the lack of complexity of a small picture. Like, I love the fact that you have your strips, you make the day, you move on. Like, there's not that level of, it's like juggling and spinning plates at the same time when you're working on, you've got multiple units, you've got the DP doing, burning, vaporizing water, you've got another DP doing close up on a card or a thumb or or whatever it might be. And that's all happening simultaneously. And you're trying to relive the shot back that you've done already of the wide, and you're reviewing it. And I love that level of plate spinning. That is fun, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And at some point, all you want to do is just, read a newspaper, sit back, read a newspaper and have a coffee. Like, it's,
That's what David Watkin used to do, apparently. David Watkin used to light a set, and he used to have a set designed so there was a special room where he could go and sit and read the newspaper. Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah, no, apparently,
No,
on a big sets, he would light the set because he was, master of soft light, and then he would go in this little space that the set had built into it, and he'd sit there and read his newspaper. That's absolutely true story. But so you could do that.
But But if anyone's watching, I would love a small film, please. Any small,
Me
two
too.
people sitting around a table having a chat.
I think both of them want a small film.
But when it's a not job site. This is not job site, Greg, really. But it's like, it's interesting when you say 103 days. That actually didn't. I know there's many days where the not shoot, you're traveling and all the rest, but that doesn't seem that much for that film. In the context of Coda, we did a 103-day shoot, and it certainly wasn't a superhero movie.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, don't quote me on those dates. I don't want to be
Called out.
Okay.
No, so don't quote me on those dates. It could have been a little more. There was second units, there was splinters, there was Chicago's. Again, the add them all up, maybe it's more than that. I don't.
Yeah. How do you? We're going back to another question that we didn't quite talk about. Was how do you choose your crew? Do you have a core of people you work with on any movie, every movie, and then how do you interview people? How do you find a crew when it's such a complex, combination?
Again, I've been very fortunate to have some really solid crew in different countries. Obviously, if I'm in the United States or London or Australia or India, the crews have to kind of be slightly different to evolve where the funding's coming from and all sorts of things. But crew is critical. It's absolutely critical. As you know, I know we've had this discussion. Like, there's no point in doing a movie. If you're doing a movie with the wrong crew, you're better off not doing the movie. Like, it's if it's the wrong personality types,
painful.
It can be super painful. And obviously, we can't choose the crew that we don't choose.
Right.
But when we can choose the crew, I treat it very seriously. It's mind blowing how critical attitudes can be, spirit can be. If you've got a can-do spirit and a can-do attitude, and everyone has bad days, and every crew has emotional ups and downs, but it's imperative that everyone just gets the job done. There's no time for crap. I mean, I don't have time for crap, basically, and the job's too hard, and there's
also,
too much going on.
Yeah, you're spending so much time there, you might as well enjoy it. So you don't want someone that's going to take away from that enjoyment. It's going to be hard enough as it is.
I mean, it's such a critical, it's casting, isn't it? It's the equivalent of casting.
Yeah.
It's obviously no one in the audience sees Gary Hims's smiling face when he's achieved a shot.
Or hears
and it's really
his dulcent tones as he sings.
Singing.
Right, Elton John.
Yeah. I'll have to suffer him when Arsenal has won a game.
Yeah. Stay in frame, Rush.
I don't engage in the football chat.
It's just as well, yeah.
Back and go, oh yeah.
Yeah, we oftentimes find that it's not really experience that we're looking for than enthusiasm. So we might choose someone with a lot of enthusiasm versus someone that's had so much experience, it's just like not exciting to them anymore.
Yeah. Agreed. I find that ego can be a real nasty thing as well. From everybody, from me included. Like, there's a point where if you let ego have any place on a film set, then it just doesn't work. It's like it's a virus that goes through. Like, if people start getting uppity about, I think being egoless. I mean, no one's egoless, of course. Everyone has that pang of like, oh, I didn't do it right, or they're telling me it's wrong, or do it again because I screwed up. But if you can get over those kind of childish qualities that humans naturally have, that's exactly, I'm same as you. I prefer they have less experience. I prefer we had to go again because something was not quite right, but the spirit was there to overcome it.
How do you deal, or do you get stressed out when you start a movie? And is there anything you do to deal with it?
No, I mean, no, I could start some rumor about some drug habit I've developed, but no, I haven't yet developed a drug habit because of that. Do I? Yeah, I get stressed because the 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 level that I would wish to achieve is super high. You know, that the goal, and then when you're unsure of the world that you're building. You know, at the beginning of a film, again, going back to the lens discussion, what is the lens of this movie? What is the world we're building? You know from references, you know from discussions what you're kind of headed towards. But then when you're not quite sure what that is, that's where I get a little bit flustered. And I say that I try and be internally flustered, not external. I try not to pass that stress onto anybody else. But that's where I get a little bit internally flustered on what is this? Like, how do we do this? How do we achieve this goal? And like some of the early days on Batman, you know, I think the first stuff we shot was the mayor's mansion after the death, before the death and then after the death. Again, it was trying to find what that theme was, or that mood was. You know, how dark was dark? How much could we see into his eyes? That got a bit stressful, I'd say, because, you know, trying to find that balance and knowing what it shouldn't be. Yeah, it was quite a tough scene to shoot, actually. Around this dead body, the whole three-hander, it was actually quite tricky. And then the superintendent comes in, and actually it was one of the more complicated blocking scenes that I think we did, even though it probably doesn't look that way.
Yeah. We've got some questions that have come in, so I thought maybe we could do a couple of these questions. Let me just see. Okay, let's try this one. How was using the volume different on the Batman compared to your experience on The Mandalorian, considering shooting times were a couple of years later?
It was effectively the same. I mean, there's a whole other conversation of shooting on a volume about how you achieve the goals of getting something on the screen, because there's a lot of with new technology, different departments start to increase in importance. So, like, if you're building a volume as a shooting backing, the VFX department will be involved heavily at the beginning, which they're normally not. Normally, you've got a VFX supervisor saying blue screen, green screen. Like, sorry, that's disrespectful. They say more than that, but they're not really getting in your ice bowl about how you light a scene. On a volume, you're heavily working with the visual effects department on how to light a scene. And visual effects, their skill level is looking at that picture on a screen. Like, that's, again, it's not to undermine anybody, but that's what they do every day. They assess an image, they look at why it looks wrong, how they can improve it. We as DPs and designers, we don't do that. We stand on the set to solve a problem with lighting, blocking, atmosphere, lenses, all those things. And so trying to find that relationship balance where you're training the post people about what you need and understanding they're deficient in some areas and you're deficient in other areas is trying to find that balance to work together, because technologically, I have no idea how they do that stuff on the screens. Like, I'm staying willfully ignorant about how they do that because I don't have the space to learn it. But I know when it's not right, and I know when it needs to be changed. So that's a long answer, but how is it different? The panels were a bit different. We got higher resolution panels, but that wasn't an important difference. The detail that they could put on the screen was higher res, as in you could have more detail. At Mandalorian, it was all about blocks, geometric shapes. Didn't do grass very well. It did trees previously, whereas that volume experience was a lot higher res. So it was probably better in camera. And also, everyone at ILM had learnt over the few years subsequently about what to do. So, and also, sorry, Also, the volume design was different because I got to I designed both Mandalorian volume, as in designed, I, spec'd it,
Worked on it, yeah.
and Batman. And I changed. There's a lot of things about the Mando that I would have changed. The shape of it, the roof,
Yeah.
and I did on Batman.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So the volume actually on that, when you shot the rooftop with Wayne Manor, the volume had a roof on it, did it? I see it's a big curve, but did it have a top as well?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. It had
Wow.
at a top, had an inset ceiling that had,
Yeah.
I think they were about 20 by 20 size that we could move separately.
Oh, wow. Wow. That makes sense.
Whereas on Mandalorian, we had a fixed ceiling that sat over the walls that would then create a perfect reflection in Mando's helmet. So
right.
the requirements for Mando versus Batman were quite different. Remember also on Batman, we needed to have water for rain, and these panels are notoriously not waterproof. So there's issues there, but we got around them.
Okay. As it is a very dark movie, did you shoot this dark or did you make it darker in post? How did you handle exposure?
Yeah, I'm interested in this. I think I know the answer in terms that you kind of create the image on set. But how much do you do in post? I mean, you talked about going to film and back, but how much do you do in terms of color and timing and
Nothing for color because it was dialed in pretty close. I mean, when I say nothing for color, that's not true. Of course, Dave Cole, my colorist,
Yeah.
did a lot, and his contribution was invaluable. So I wouldn't say nothing. But I think when we left the film, it was pretty much looking the way that we wanted it to look. It just needed to be brought onto the big screen, and it needed finessing. The biggest things that I felt like we used the grade for was to do things like lifting eyes out a little bit, dropping, like just that classic thing where the finesse on a set of knocking down an entire wall will take an hour and a half and 25 people versus knowing window something. We did a bit of that, but in terms of exposure, I think we rated maybe the Alexa at 320, maybe 250 on dark scenes. So again, I could lift and pull and do those things that. So there was a bit of a backstop, we didn't.
So you had more in it,
1600 ASA.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Just-
So that's
just
kind of in a way like you were
again-
shooting on film. I always used when shooting on film, I'd always overexpose a little bit on night work if I had it, just to give myself really decent blacks. So basically, you were doing the same by rating the camera a little slower, right?
Yeah, because we never really blew anything out. Like in the if you think about the zone system for exposure, like all of our zones were sitting in 3, 4, and 5, and with the occasional 7. Like we never went to an 8 or a 9 or a 10 on our highlights. So by coming down to 320 or even 250, I was still keeping within the range of the chip, and it was staying exposed, but then bringing it down a little bit later, just to get the most amount of detail.
Talk about the zone
Because
system.
very rarely. Say again.
Can you explain the zone system? How do you use that?
Well, I mean, my understanding of it, and again, when I say trained as a photographer, which doesn't mean much, but the understanding that I was having with the zone system when we were pushing and pulling the negative was that, okay, if you've got 10 defined tones in a picture, from 0 being black, no detail, to 10 white, no detail, then all of those tones have to sit within that 10 stop range or 10 numbered range. I don't think the stops necessarily apply, but all of those tones need to sit in there. So my understanding was that Ansel Adams had developed the technique whereby if he would shoot a high contrast scene, he would pull the neg so that the highlights would come down, and he would retain the highlights, but still maintain the shadows. So he'd take something that sat outside of the 10 range, and he would suck it back into the 10 range, And then when he printed it, he would print it right to the edges of the 10 range. So he would overexpose, underdevelop, or overexpose and underdevelop. And then when he was to printing, then he would then add his contrast or suck his contrast back in. That's why his prints are so detailed with tone. They have like every tone you could imagine. They feel like they've got contrast, but they have multitudes of tone. And so the way I think about it with the Alexa is that 800 is our base. Let's say if we're shooting let's say a white rabbit in a snowstorm, everything's going to be in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range. We take that 7, 8, 9, 10 range, pull it down to 4, 5, and 6 by shooting the whole sequence at 2000 ASA. So then you're underexposing back into that range, and then you print it back to where it should be. Or if it's the other way, you shoot everything that should be 2, 3, 4 and bring it up to 4, 5, 6, and then print it down later. So that's the way I understand it. Again, it's
No,
I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's how much of my Ansel Adams theory is correct, but yeah.
that's a great explanation.
Okay, so how do you stay involved during the post-production process? Is this sometimes an issue? I think this is a really, really important issue. Then certainly we fight it a lot in that so much is done in visual effects now. It's really important for the DP to be involved in post in that as it's going through the process. But what do you think?
Yeah, 1000%. It defies logic to me that we all clink champagne at the end of a shoot and don't see each other until we see the first cut or see the final cut. Like it, and it's not just DPs though; it's also designers, because designers have designed the world from the beginning, and then they wave goodbye and they're on to another job, which everyone has to earn a living. It's not the designer's fault or the DP's fault, but there are very few allowances for that in the process, so that when you say, no, I want to be there to light that scene in post, like you want to integrate the lighting, you want an opinion, you want someone to ask you. I understand why it doesn't happen, because studios are loath to pay because it's never paid before. They don't want to start a precedent. Often you're onto another job and you're in the middle of another job and you're trying to approve a shot. So I understand the practicalities of it, but I think it's crazy because, a designer I think is the most obvious of that, because if they're designing backgrounds for shots, the designer needs to be involved as much as he ever was, and so yeah.
But it's also, the DP is also natural, because in a way if they're adding an element, they're lighting that element, and is it working within what you set up? And it is absolutely possible to do, because especially in the beginning stages, it can be done remotely, and you can, in the very beginning when it's just putting things in place, you can see it on a laptop, but then there's always a facility near you so you can go. I know that we fight this and we've never gotten paid for it, but we'll do it because we want the film to be the best that it can be. And it's I'm just always surprised that they don't think that it's important. Usually the directors do. The studio might not, but the directors realize.
Well, this is where, again, part of my mantra now with the future of my learning and understanding is learning more about how to lens things in 3D, and which happens sometimes in post and sometimes in prep and sometimes in the shoot, so that it's not okay for an image to make the movie that hasn't been seen by the director of photography. Like, it's not okay for someone to assume that if they're making a shot in 3D, that the DP hasn't had a say in it, and it's, again, I don't point fingers and pay blame. It's just that that was the shoot and this is the post. And whereas if we understand more about that process, and if we've got our finger on the pulse, we can go, all right, that sequence that you're doing, let's let's talk about what the lens might be, like even remotely, like you said, even if it's kind of at least the discussion's been had, and it's so the vision of the movie is being done by the director of photography. But this is where you talk about like having a great VFX suit is also really helpful to that, because then they understand that, and also having a great director also understands that DP's job isn't just to bring their crew and set up a light and then go home. Like it's the whole thing from here to here.
And it makes the movie better. It makes the movie much better because it's consistent and there is a look to the movie.
Exactly. Consistency is the key, isn't it? So listen, it is sometimes an issue. It's a good question. This is where, again, I think on Batman and the grade, you know, obviously there are targets on things. There are targets on that post-process because of time and money. And, you know, having Matt fight for it was critical. So that's the reason why we got to do the film out, and because he fought for it.
Okay. What was the most difficult scene to shoot? Excuse me. What was the most difficult scene to shoot in the Batman?
It's like asking me which of my children.
Children, I know.
Yeah.
And I think they might even be watching, and so I want to be careful how I answer that question.
Your children might be watching?
Yeah, they might be. Try to train them up to be DPs. You know, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. Okay, from a lighting standpoint, I mean, the Riddler's apartment was tricky at times because you know there's naturally light in some parts of that apartment. You know, we put a fluorescent above the workstation, and there's natural places for light to be motivated by. But then there's other stuff occurring in the bathroom or on the other side, which there wasn't a natural key light, and I had to always, every time I had to make it up every single shot and find that right balance of like, well, is it Phil coming from the kitchen? Is it coming from the desk? Is it from the street light outside? And how much is too much? And so I recall that not having didn't land naturally. But I don't recall. I mean, the exterior Penguin, the Batmobile lighting up was a challenge because we all realized the importance of an iconic shot of this car. You know, this is just film lore, isn't it? It's like the Batmobile is a character unto itself. And so coming up with the right balance that, again, when the car starts up, that you're seeing the shape of it, not too much of it. It's an amazing design, but do you want to reveal all of it at that point in time? No, you want to reveal the menace.
That's interesting.
That is like, I remember, you know, watching, was it Spielberg's film, the truck film, the menace of those trucks, the menace of this vehicle has to be as scary as anything. And so with the sounds, but with the visuals not showing too much. So that was tricky. It wasn't hard. It was just tricky. Everything was tricky. Everything was tricky. And that's why it was so satisfying, because everything was like, okay, now we've got to do that. It's like, okay, let's do, yeah.
That's interesting. It just made me think. I mean, you had some very big rigs, but most of the images I've seen behind the scenes, I don't see a lot of lighting on set. Did you do a lot of lighting on the floor from shot to shot, or did you tend to light the space knowing what the blocking was going to be?
It was more that, yeah. It was more that.
Yeah.
We very often, though, obviously to get into Rob's eyes, that's a hard character to light. You know, I had a light on camera, which we dialed in for Zoe. There was a beautiful cyan that we found for her that would just give her just a hint of cyan reflection in her makeup. She had a fantastic makeup. So for the most part, it was super small little panels, like it was the ribbon panels. And, you know, and this is where having a great actor is fantastic, because, you know, there's only so much lighting you can do with a stand-in. There's only so much finesse you can do with a stand-in, particularly with a mask, by the way.
Yeah,
so
right.
having Rob on set for maybe a little bit longer than I would ordinarily be used to. Like ordinarily, an actor walks on set, you ask them to stand at the number twos, you check the lighting on them and go, ready to go. There were times where I was holding Rob. It felt like an eternity. It was probably only 2 minutes, right? But like I was holding Rob in position, staring where he needed to stare to make sure that eye hit that light so that he had something. And he understood. He was clever. This bat suit was heavy. So, you know, I'm sure anytime he could take it off, he would. But he was very, very, I was respectful of that. And I thanked him every day. I mean, he was like, shut up. Stop begging me. Like, I know what I need to do. So they knew what they needed to do.
Yeah.
Here's another volume question. How much do you need to rely on shallow depth of field for the volume? Would deep depth of field shots be possible inside the volume?
Yeah, it's a really good question because my understanding, again, and this is where I'm looking forward to watching other people shoot on a volume and seeing success or failure. I deliberately have chosen, when I've shot on a volume, to use the largest format I can find with the fastest fall off that I can find, because invariably the volumes are too smaller than they should be. Like when you're looking at Gotham, the Gotham isn't 20 feet away. Gotham is 200 feet or 1,000 feet, or so the camera, I reckon, picks that up on wide shots. If you've got a character at 20 feet and then the wall at 35 feet, to have that correct focus fall off is hard. And I think that if you're on a wide lens with lots of depth, I'm not as convinced that the magic trick would sell as well. You know, I've never done that, and I've never wanted to do it, frankly, because I'm not. I did a few little tests, by the way, on the Batman volume, because there was a chance that I was going to use a volume on another film with wider lenses after that film, or we were looking at a few things, and I tested some wider lenses on the volume, and I was I couldn't crack it. You know, I could not crack it. Just didn't feel right. There was a lot of things wrong with it. Which kind of sucks, because it means that we're making decisions, the tail's wagging the dog then, right? So we're making decisions based on the technology as opposed to the other way around. So yes, I have been shooting on with a shallow depth of field as much as possible to help the magic trick.
Can you adjust the volume when you've got the camera up and a certain lens on? Can you adjust the playback on the volume in terms of focus? If it's a completely virtual reality, is it possible to program it that you can change that focus?
It is. That is one of the discussions. That is one of the things I'm not. I mean, yes. No is the short answer. Yes is the long answer.
But it should be.
It's
possible
coming
soon.
There's two issues. I think because it's 3D, you can control every element of the 3D.
Right.
You could, in theory, say you're on a 32 mil. You are 12 feet from your subject, and you're pulling focus to 6 feet as they walk towards you. The wall is at 20 feet, so the images are all at 20 feet, but everything that's on the wall is at 30, 50, 100. So there is logic to say that as you're pulling focus from 12 to 6, that the background also defocuses with that same algorithm that physics would give you. The problem is that anamorphic, when you go out of focus, squeezes vertical. So it really squeezes vertical. So how much does the wall need to de-squeeze or unsqueeze or squeeze? So it's a thing. It's a discussion point, and the short answer is it should. It doesn't properly. There are depth maps that happen right now, but it's not at the level that I think that it's not at that point where you can. It's not a magic trick yet. That's not quite there.
Well, it seems like a future possibility. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
With all this extensive pre-planning, how many surprises did you encounter on set, or did it go mostly according to your plan?
Well, we didn't expect to be shut down by a virus.
Yeah.
Um, no, I think for the most part, I think for the most part it went according to plan. I mean, yeah, but for the most part it went to plan. I mean, we planned the exterior Mayor's Memorial, so we'd shoot it in cloud or in shadow. That all came off without a hitch. No, we had good surprises. Good surprises. There's always those good surprises where, you've got a shot of, Paul Dano with his head on the counter of the cafe, and you find a slightly better shot than you planned, because of it's Paul Dano and he's doing great things. So there's all those beautiful actor surprises that you can't plan for. But I think technically it all was, I think it all went off without a hitch.
Yeah, well, it turned out a pretty good movie, so I think you're all right. This is an interesting question. I'm curious if the long prep time for this film led to any permanent changes to your pre-production process that you've taken into your films since, or will take into future films, even your small ones.
It's a super good question, because COVID, again, it's a boring conversation of COVID, but COVID showed us what was viable and what was not viable. So we were not allowed to go to Chicago to scout. And that wasn't a bad thing. Like, again, we went, all right, well, let's use the technology. We've got a 3D video camera. Let's drive down every street in Chicago that we were planning on driving down for real. We can scout it with our iPads or the goggles, and we can choose. Seeing photos, you need spatial awareness, as we know, when you see a location. And what a three-dimensional camera does is it gives you spatial awareness of how far things are away. And that for me was, I was blown away. Like, there's no reason why we couldn't scout like that. Or there's another option. Again, this is a very long conversation, but you could photogrammetry. You could have a photographer or a drone go and shoot all the locations you are thinking of shooting in, and you could get into Unreal in the goggles and you could experience those locations. So instead of, 25 people getting an airplane going to a city or a desert or
That's
whatever
interesting.
to look at rocks, buildings, you could have 2 people working for 3 months to blanket an environment and photograph it. And then the 20 people could sit for 4 days in one room in the place where so I think you could be more efficient if you then get those 20 locations down to 3, and then you go to the 3 to do your final checks. So I think there's many changes we saw that hopefully could be carried over. Communication systems now, I think we use the different belt pack communication system that I forget the name of it, Rydell's, that you can call in on your phone and you could be on someone's comms. So I could be talking to my second unit DP on his comms without having to text him.
Wow.
He's on his comms. So
Yeah.
I think we all stepped up the processes through that. Now, whether or not they hold is a question for producers, because again, all those things that I've said, they cost money. Do producers see the logic of sending somebody to photogrammetry 20 buildings or 20 rocks, or rather than sending pictures, you photogrammetry, like are they tuned in enough to make that viable? And sorry to just keep talking.
No, that's all right.
Is the crew willing to do it like that? Like, is the director, production designer, and the DP, do they feel like it's an appropriate and useful system? Because not everyone will.
Yeah.
My pushback would be it would take away part of my life experience.
Because you want to go to those
I
locations.
sit on a computer looking at somewhere. I love being there. I love the peripheral things that happen when you go somewhere and the unexpected things that you see.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right, because there's all those things you never would have seen on the way to another location.
Yeah.
And an idea that you had whilst
exactly.
talking. So 1,000% there's that act of of happenstance, you know. But
Yeah, it's also that
I don't know,
time
I
you
think
have, the time you have with a director and a production designer, everybody else, when on location, and especially initial location scouts. It's hard to get a director in a room and actually have a conversation about stuff you're not looking at, and for it, you know, to get really down to the details. So I find location scouting some of the most important part of filmmaking, and you have that really close conversations with the people you're working with.
totally, yeah. I mean, I think I said a lot of the things that those efficiencies that we've discovered in COVID might take away from some of those things you're talking about.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
they also might be in that you can refine, like maybe you still do all those location scouts, but you refine it from 50 locations down to 20, and your time is anyway. I don't know, but yes, there are definitely things to improve.
Well, this has been great. This has been great. And it also just occurred to me, it's amazing that you made such an incredible movie with all the restrictions of COVID. More power to you. Good for you.
Yeah.
Right. It means, listen, I've told you guys, it means a lot hearing compliments about that movie from you guys, because it meant a lot to us to get right as you know, it can be branded as a superhero movie, but you know, ultimately it's a guy with personal problems who you know, dresses up to fight injustice. You know, like the way I see it, like I see it a bit more. Yes, but no, I so appreciate it, because we fought for that. Matt and I fought for that level of quality, and we fought none of our people, but we fought just the universe. You know, to try and produce something that was compelling as possible.
It's interesting because, I mean, you can take any genre and make it superficial, or you can make it relate to us, to people, to normal life in a way. And that's what I felt you did with Batman. But you also stretched the technology further than anybody else has done, in my opinion, and created a visual masterpiece. But it's actually, as you say, in the end, it's about character, moral values. It's about, what do you stand up for? What's worth fighting for? Who are we? You know, I mean, without being completely silly, but it was just great.
Yeah. You did a good job.
Thank you, guys. It means a lot. It means a lot. You know how much that means. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Greig.
And thanks for everyone who, whoops, sorry, as I hit every mic that I can. Thanks for watching.
All right.